You're listening to Filling the Storehouse podcast. I'm David.
And I'm Stuart, and we want to walk with you on the journey to living the abundant life through faith, family, and freedom. Our goal is to refine our why while helping you find yours. Together, achieve our best and highest purpose. In the end, we'll drive each other to intentionally fill our storehouse.
What's up, Storehouse Tribe? Hey, this is Stu, and hey, I just wanted to hit on one of the tenets of this podcast, financial freedom. David and I honestly think that the best way to get to financial freedom is through real estate investing. We've been investing in real estate for quite some time, and one of the coolest things about real estate is the relationships that we are able to create. We basically use partners on every single deal that we do, both in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for our turnkey rental company, and through some of our bigger deals. You know, we've done some stuff, some commercial properties here in Colorado where we live, and we're looking to do more. So if that's something that sounds of interest to you, we'd love to kind of tell you what we got going on, what we're doing. We're looking for more partners. We love building relationships and having, that trust with our partners and the ability to offer opportunities to invest alongside with us. If that's something of interest, hey, reach out to us. We'd love to jump on the phone. We'd love to jump on a Zoom call, tell you what we're up to. You can reach out to us through social media channels. You can hit us up on LinkedIn. You can hit us up on Facebook. Well, hit up me on Facebook. Don't hit up David. You can send us an email. You can go to our website, Storehouse 310 Turnkey, and go to the Contact Us page. Send us an email at podcast@Storehouse 310 Turnkey. Any of those options, reach out. Let's talk real estate, and we'd love to tell you what we're up to. Enjoy this episode. Most importantly, go fill your storehouse. See you. All right, gentlemen. Good morning. Good to see you all. This is Filling the Storehouse podcast, and we have an amazing guest on today. I'm super excited about this conversation. David has his like really nerdy, thick glasses on today, so we might get a little nerdy. We're gonna talk about some science. We're gonna talk about some breathing, and this is gonna be good.
Hey, and this is how well I know you. I knew you were gonna make a comment, and I was thinking about it, and I'm like, what's interesting? Why do I feel compelled to wear glasses today? Well, first, I've worn glasses for like 30 years, so there's that. But I did want to get, I want to look a little smarter, and because this topic we're going to talk about today is amazing. And I also realized I never wear glasses with you because you don't mentally challenge me in any way. Most of the conversations that you present are relatively childish, I think. Maybe lacking sophistication, but today is going to be different.
Yeah. All right.
You said the glasses elevate that, right? Is that what you're saying? The glasses elevate the sophistication. I should get my blue lights, my blue light glasses, but I don't have them handy. So.
Yeah. I actually have some of those too. I haven't worn them in a long time. My wife gave them to me. She's like, "You're in front of the computer all the time. You need to start wearing these blue light glasses."
Make a difference.
But anyways, James, it's great to have you on. You came and talked to us a couple months ago, I think, in the War Room, the War Room Mastermind about breathing, about breath work, and I was super intrigued. I'd love to have, we wanted to have you come back on this podcast and talk about all things breathing, which is kind of an important thing in our life, I know. But
for most of us, yeah.
But sometimes like we don't really think about it a whole lot, right?
Yeah.
So if you could give us a little background, tell us who you are and what you do and how you got into this whole like breathwork thing.
Sure. Yeah. So, if you haven't noticed, a little bit of an accent. So I grew up, born and raised in Australia, geologist by, let's say, tick in the box from an educational perspective, but then traveled a lot. So lived in, Canada, the US, Greece, London a little. So, and met with a reasonable amount of success in business and personal life, married, got 2 kids, so, and was pretty, happy. So I thought, right. And then come, mid 30s, late 30s, it's like, I've got the things that I'm supposed to have to make me happy, and was just really, so I'd say I was successful and, sort of full of success and short on fulfillment. And so, it started really at my wife's urging. We went to a Hay House event where, Wayne Dyer, Bruce Lipton, Joe Dispenza, and a few other people were speaking. And I got hooked mostly by Joe Dispenza and Bruce Lipton talking about, a lot of the science behind their methodologies, because that, clicks in for me from a logic and tactical standpoint. And so I sort of, that word journey, I went on a bit of a seeking a little more fulfillment. And, I'd been to plenty of different trainings like Tony Robbins and other things. And so you'd heard all those things about you want to, change the outer world, change the inner world first. And, all of this, these platitudinal type things that really resonated, at least from a very tactical and cerebral level, but never really, from this sort of space. And then, probably the biggest, if you want to call one of the biggest crises of my life was, my wife and I got pretty sideways about 4 or 5 years ago. And talked about divorce and sort of semi-separated for a little while. And then, she'd mentioned to me, hey, listen, you might like this. And got me, sort of introduced me to Wim Hof, Wim Hof method. And, I toyed with it a little bit. And then, went actually to another motivational speaker and with a friend of hers, and he's like, oh, Maya tells me you're a big Wim Hof guy. And so we got to his house and we, he's like, we're going to do it right now. And so we did like these rounds of breath work, for 3 days straight, twice a day. And it was like, wow, I really, really felt it. And so I then sort of made a commitment to do it every day for 30 days. And did the breath work every day for 30 days about 5 years ago. And then that Christmas, my wife bought me a trip to Poland to go and, train with Wim and spend, 10 days with him. And just magical from getting out of Poland and doing things, and had some really, unique experiences that, still at that point in time, it was just a practice for me. It was, to help me, I call, to get my giddy up and get in touch with a little more who I am. And then, a couple of guys that I left Poland with, 2 guys from Switzerland, another guy from Israel. We all agreed, hey, listen, let's do an ice bath and our breath work every day. We set up our little WhatsApp group and we did it for 45 days. And it changed my life, changed my marriage, changed my relationship with my kids. And then I'm just like, hey, listen, I got to teach people this. I got to serve. And again, the idea of going to Poland wasn't to become an instructor or anything like that. It was just to, fill my cup a little more. And, I was just, enthralled at how the simplicity of what you do, it's not simple, but the simplicity behind breath work, cold exposure and different things, and how it changed me. And I'm like, I got to share it. So then went down the road of becoming an instructor and got a few different other breathwork certifications to just get a tick in the box to get your foot in the door. So now I'm here on a podcast talking about something I'm passionate about. So thanks for having me.
No, it's fascinating. And for prep, well, one, I hadn't really paid much. I've heard people talk about it. Like you said, there's these platitudes and I'd not really, hadn't dove into it. And then you talked to the War Room Mastermind, and that piqued my interest a little bit. But then I was looking through the resources that you sent in preparation for the podcast. And we started getting into the some of those folks started getting into the science of it and the nitty gritty. I was like, we'll talk some of the specifics here later, but I think the bigger idea of the science behind it was fascinating to me. And right before we logged on, Stu had mentioned that, he read someone said something about kind of was bashing, the breathing and the different methods, but I think it's very easy to bash if you're ignorant on it. And I also think there is a very deep science to it. Now, if you don't mind, without getting into all the techniques that we'll get into here in a bit, but that science piece of it, you said it resonated with you. Like how do you, when you're going through training, how do you get people to make that shift? Because for me, it was watching a video. I was ignorant on it, watched a couple of videos and was like, wow, this is not just some like mumbo jumbo.
Yeah.
Like, there's actual science to it.
Well, I think there's a lot of, if you want to call it, esoteric woo-woo around it, right? So you see some guy maybe dressed in a robe, sort of talking in, and it resonates with some people, it just doesn't with others. And then people just go switch, slide left and move on. And so for me, what I'll often say, especially with a super ventilative breath work, which is AKA Wim Hof, is I find it, and especially obviously I'm looking through a masculine perspective, so through a man's eyes, it's the easiest way to trip over a spiritual experience, doing a superventilative breath work for like 10 to 30 minutes. Something happens at some point in time, and maybe not the first time, but it grabs you straight away. And so as compared to a meditation practice that I had for a long time, where I'm sort of like, and I still have a meditation practice, so I'm certainly not canning meditation, but for some of us who have some focus challenges, right, and who are like, you know what, this isn't my thing. Yeah, breath work for me was, it got me from, let's say, A to M, in T minus 10, rather than, waiting for a couple of weeks and really having to do that. So from there, I was hooked, because, hey, listen, something's going on here, right? I'm feeling it. Both what I'll talk about is like the physical and the non-physical parts of me are feeling it, right? So I was feeling it physiologically, and then there's something happen mentally, right? Whether it's greater clarity and there's, a little opening. And then so I just get, for me, it helps click those things into place of then what's happening physiologically. Like, why does this happen? Why is breathing into my belly better? Why am I more relaxed when I'm doing this? Why am I got a greater giddy up when I'm doing that? And then you start learning about, probably one of the simplest ways, to describe breath work is it's just the conscious manipulation of our breath, right? We're doing roughly 20,000 breaths a day. And every time you take a breath, you're sending a message, not only to your autonomic nervous system, but to all over your body. And so when you think about that, like, you've heard some of the self-improvement type thing is you've got this monkey mind that talks to you all the time, right? So you've got this talking going on. When you're taking a breath, you've got actually physiological messages being sent to all different parts of your body, mostly your autonomic nervous system. So, hey, listen, what messages am I sending? And so I get really curious about that. And then training, different people, from people with, depression and those sorts of things to professional athletes, right? It's expanding your awareness. And so I think that's really the key for me is, I had this heightened sense of awareness of something's going on physiologically. And then I get really curious about that. And then you're like, hang on a second, something else is happening, either mentally, spiritually, or I just call it the non-physical part of me. Something else is happening here. And so if that answers that question a little.
Yeah. So David, what he's referring to is, there's a guy within our network who I saw a post that he posted on, I think it was Facebook or some social media channel, where like he was basically claiming, he's a real estate investor. He's bought, millions of dollars worth of real estate. And he claims that there's no correlation to business success from things like meditation and ice baths and breathing and all this kind of woo-woo stuff. And I was like, well, there's a lot of guys that do this stuff, Tony Robbins obviously is a huge fan of it. And there's tons of people, I know, I'm assuming within your network and our network that does this stuff. There's got to be some type of correlation to success, to personal success, to business success, when taking this kind of stuff seriously. And, how does breathing help, increase human performance? Like, how do you do better by breathing and being, focused on that? So
I think, the basic tenet there for me is it takes us from an external focus to an internal focus, right? Yeah. So how from an improvement, whether it's in my own physiology, whether it's performance based, I'm going from any external factor to an internal factor, right? So what's going on within me? And getting back to those messages that I'm sending every time I take a breath. If I slow down my respiration, I slow down my heartbeat, I relax my body, and those sorts of things. So, that whole tenet of belly breathing, right? If I breathe into my belly, and this is sort of, basic breath work. If I breathe into my belly, it sends a message to my autonomic nervous system. I'm going into my parasympathetic, which is rest and digest. And then when I chest breathe. So if you're, exercising, quickly, or you're running, those sorts of things, or you're panicky, your chest breathing and that sends a message to my autonomic nervous system, fight or flight, right? So it's elevating pulse. I've got vaso expansion to get all that blood going, and so even just understanding what those different breaths do can get me into a situation now, of more efficient cardiovascular health, right? Despite the last 2 years, cardiovascular disease is still the biggest killer of people in the world. And I'm not saying, listen, if you breathe properly, you're going to, cure cardiovascular disease, but you can reduce your blood pressure. Again, this is some of the geek nerd type stuff for me. I bought a blood pressure machine. I have a pulse oximeter, and often, I will say, I'll take my blood pressure sometimes in a week when I want to test it 3 times a day, before breath work, after breath work. And a lot of us have this feeling that we're just static most of the time, right? So static breath, static pulse, unless I'm exercising or sleeping, static blood pressure. It fluctuates all over, right? And I think the first part of any sort of improvement is you got to have awareness, right? So to me, having this breath work, and again, takes me, if you want to take it into some sort of reflective or certainly introspective space of what's going on internally, which we just don't do very much in the world we live in. We're so externally, distracted that's probably the biggest place to start is turning that awareness inward, physically and mentally.
That's great. David?
Yeah, and I think you make a great point, because we oftentimes, until we do something or we dig into it or actually attempt it, right, we have all these opinions about it, and typically those opinions are wrong. And I think if you really analyze your decision-making process, the things that you do, we're wrong a lot more than we're right, which is good, because we grow from,
especially in David's sense.
Yeah, especially and I would highlight my choice of co-host and business partner, right? Like oftentimes you just strike out, but you learn that through that process is where the true growth comes from. And I think that growth mindset is cultivated in failure, not in success. And so,
I think to that point, right, is all of us, I think, certainly when we're younger, you all heard those stories about, when you're a baby, you don't tell the baby to give up when they're trying to walk and all that sort of stuff, right? Yeah. But we get programmed as we're adults. Oh shit, I've done that once, and I failed. I got to stop, right? I would imagine, I know my first real estate deal that I did, if I stopped after my first 3, I lost money on my first 3 real estate. And if I stopped, then, I wouldn't have some of the passive income that I have today. If I stopped after, I dated my first girlfriend, and, I wouldn't be married today. Right. Yeah. So, but I think as we get older, we just, stop that, don't wait out there,
Yeah. And I think what I love about it though, too, is that there is so much science behind it. And, you talk about the geeking out and I think it's not just the geeking out, but it's exposing yourself to the knowledge and what's out there to understand that, even when it comes to inflammation, right? And the how many people are dying from inflammation and how it impacts all the different aspects of your body, and, monkey brain and fog brain and heart and all that stuff. And if there's a method that's free and you naturally do it, you just are conscious of it, then I think there's it's absolutely worthwhile to explore. And if it can help decrease through science-based knowledge, it can help decrease some of that inflammation and that stress in your body. I don't know how you couldn't perform better. It's almost like saying, hey, if I don't sleep, sleep and working out, that's for some people. And, they just want to be in front of the mirror, but, it doesn't really help my performance. Really? Like, do you work out? No. Okay. Well, then you shouldn't have an opinion on it. But I think it's the same with this breathing. And I'd be curious if you could just, kind of dive into maybe some of the higher level breathing exercises and what you've seen through your life and your clients and just help walk us through that a little bit.
So I think getting back to our autonomic nervous system, right? So autonomic nervous system has 2 parts: sympathetic, parasympathetic, and that's parasympathetic being our rest and digest, and our sympathetic being our fight or flight. And typically most of us, often, obviously the last 2 years, a lot of us have sat in front of a screen most of the time, right? And so we're sedentary, which then reduces the capacity of our lungs. And most of the time, especially when we're talking, interesting science fact, we're the only animal on the planet that can voluntarily change our breath from here to here. Dogs, whales do it, but it's all autonomic, not, we don't have the ability. So, when we talk, we're shallow breathing, we're not deep breathing. And so a lot of the time, and I was, mouth breather when I slept for a long time. So a lot of the time what we're doing when we're mouth breathing is we're breathing into our chest, activating our sympathetic nervous system. So we're going into that fight or flight. And so we're activated, which elevates our levels of cortisol and stress chemicals typically. So we're on a lot more. And then you start shallow breathing, slowly, your shoulders start to raise up and our body just gets tense chemically as well as physiologically. Our chemistry changes when our breath changes, right? If I start breathing into my belly, start slowing my respiration, especially through the nose, will typically trigger belly breathing. Slowing down my respiration, slow down my heartbeat. Usually I'm exhaling a little bit more CO2. I go slightly, more alkaline. And so I think what's important to understand is that there are breath techniques for different situations, right? So, the 4-7-8 breath that we did, on the call is a great breath for relaxation. And then there's another breath called, sniff, sniff, poo, or, the psychological sigh, which will help, elevate us. So if I'm, didn't get a lot of sleep last night, then maybe, before I got on here today, I would have done, a minute, right? Like 10, 15 breaths of, and what that's going to do is elevate not only the amount of oxygen in my body, it's going to blow off some CO2, but it will, electrify, if you want to, a lot of energy, right? So a lot of people really can get confused, or not so much confused, but think breath is simply, elevating our oxygen levels. And I think a lot of people need to understand that, at rest here, most, the three of us are probably somewhere around 94 to 96% dissolved oxygen in our blood. So when people say, oh, you super oxygenate your body, you're going up from 96 to maybe 99 to 100, but it plays within the CO2. And keep in mind, the system that we're living in is super sensitive, right? And we'll get into performance breathing a little bit here. But some basic techniques are belly breathing to relax, nasal breathing to belly breathe will help us relax, and then mouth breathing to give us a bit of a giddy up. So, if you wanted to do, something, I didn't sleep so well, I was coming on here a couple of minutes before I get on with you guys, and I wanted to do something to elevate myself, then I do, the psychological sigh or the sniff, sniff, poo, which is about, so it's a breath work that's 2 inhales with an exhale. So it's, so you're going in 70 to 75%, then you're trying to fill the last bit with, the second breath, and then you're going to exhale through your mouth. So it's something like this. And what you feel, you may feel a little like elevation, blood pumping around your head, right? There's a hydraulic action that happens in our bodies, and whether you want to call it energy or chi, prana, whatever, starts moving, right? So I don't know if you guys want to try or whatever, but that is a breath, and it's called the psychological sigh, or sniff, sniff, poo, I call it. And that will give you a giddy up, and you can do that 15 times. You do it for a minute, and you're going to be alive and focused, right? So that's one breath work.
That's awesome. I want to make sure we clarify. So I'll start doing that before I ever get on a call with Stu to kind of help myself. But Stu, I want to make sure that you understand 100%, because you kind of have an overactive backside. It's not literally poo. It's a 2 inhales and a exhale out of your mouth.
No, so yeah, 70, 30, and then exhale.
I don't want you to. I didn't want you to be confused by that, Stu. Sorry, go on, James.
Yeah, so roughly, most of the inhale, and if you do it in 2 parts, try to fill your belly first. So if you can imagine, the first part, if you imagine like your Buddha belly up into your chest, and you relax it out. You don't have to, you come to a neutral lung, which is where your diaphragm's back relaxed. You're not squeezing it all the way out. You just, so it's, if you can imagine Buddha belly, right? And you can move your physiology. I wouldn't, let your physiology move when it happens. Don't raise your shoulders up to think, but if your physiology moves, that's fine. But that's a sniff poo, and that will give you a giddy up.
So what is the Wim Hof method?
Wim Hof method
yeah.
is, so there's 3 pillars to the Wim Hof method, and just to give credit where credit's due, Wim certainly in the last 15 years has pioneered, or certainly a trailblazer. I won't say he's the only one, but certainly a trailblazer in getting a lot of study around breath work, right? Because, again, this isn't anti-pharma or big medicine, but there's not a lot of people wanting to spend a couple of $100,000 or $1 million on teaching breath work and cold exposure when you can all get it for free, because I can't sell it to you, right? So the Wim Hof method's 3 pillars. It's breath work, cold exposure, and mindset, right? And the easiest way to describe the mindset piece is it's a bit like the glue, right? So 90% of getting something done is doing it, and so is the other 10%. So it's actually having the application to do it. Right. So, I roll out of bed most mornings and do 2 or 3 rounds of Wim Hof. On the weekends, I do a slightly longer, different breath work because I have a little bit more time. And the breath work protocol around the Wim Hof method is 30 to 40 full inhales with a relaxed exhale, 30 to 40 of those. Then you do a full inhale, relaxed exhale. Then you do a breath hold or an apnea, which is essentially, so a neutral lung apnea, for essentially as long as you can. Anywhere from a minute to 2 minutes is usually pretty good. And then you do a recovery breath, which is a full breath in and hold. And that's 1 round of Wim Hof breathing, which, we can demonstrate here in a little bit. And then the cold exposure piece can range anything from just being outside, in a cooler air temperature without a jacket on to, jumping in an ice bath. And really it's about the influence we have over our autonomic nervous system in a really activated fight or flight situation. I will say, for me, the ice bath, I certainly love to jump. I'm fortunate. I live, quarter mile from Lake Michigan. So I'm in Lake Michigan, 3 to 4 times a week during the winter, sometimes having to chop a little hole. But I've never been a big fan of that term surrender, not necessarily from like a military or like that sort of standpoint, but that whole idea of surrender for me was just a word that never really resonated, and I didn't want to embrace, probably for just belief standpoints. But what I will tell you is it took me a little while, but to really understand the power in letting go when you're in an ice bath, and as a guy, a lot of the time I'm always trying to grit through things, right? It taught me some great lessons on really the strength and the power in letting go. Wim talks about the cold being a nasty mistress, right? She's a wicked mistress, and there's nowhere to go. Like when you're in cold water, there's nowhere to go but inside, right? And you really have to learn to let go. And so that's certainly been the most valuable lesson for me is the ability to overcome that innate immune response of get me the hell out of here, right? We just call that the transition from an activated space to a more controlled space. And that's usually typically in your breath work. And then there's some adaptation happens. And then there's some amazing, there's a lot of study now around the dopamine, and cold exposure effects on dopamine. There's a lot of information about dopamine, and again, I'm no doctor, but I read. There's a lot of studies on PubMed. I listen to Huberman podcast. I'm reading a book called the Molecule of More, and in a nutshell, what it talks a lot about is most of the time when we have a spike in dopamine, so we have an elevated spike in dopamine, usually the delta above our baseline, which is not necessarily how dopamine works, but we get a spike, we usually will end up with every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, so we'll end up with a drop below our baseline. What they're finding with cold exposure is that it's much more of a gradual increase. So you get an elevation and then it sort of plateaus before it diminishes. So what they're finding, with cold exposure, especially the connection between dopamine, certainly, for military guys, PTSD and depression, is cold exposure really can help elevate that dopamine level, which gets us into a lot of better frames of mind and all that sort of stuff for a longer period without the spike and the crash. So that's the other piece, of the Wim Hof method, is the cold exposure, which, has been valuable to me. And then there's all the, wonderful physiological inflammatory properties and focus and different things like that. And that's physically. And then for me, the non-physical part of, a lot of people say, oh, well, you're used to it. But I tell you what, when, I was in the lake yesterday, the water's still cold at 38 degrees. It's not like I have this secret breath work or my skin's adapted. It's still freaking cold. And there's some days where I'm like, what on earth are you doing, man?
How long are you typically staying in the lake?
2 to 4. Yesterday was I go down with a friend of mine who's 70 years old. He's a French guy, and just amazing. We were in there for about 12 minutes yesterday. Wow. We just were having a conversation. The sun came out, and it was, and we weren't really timing, but there was his friend was there, and he goes, "You guys were there longer than 10 minutes today." But it's not about time, and just. I probably shouldn't have said time, but in an ice bath or cold water below 50 degrees, you get diminishing returns after 2 minutes. So, but you'll get plenty giddy up and effect from having a 30-second cold shower, especially if you're anywhere in the east, northeast, or anywhere in the northern part of the country this time of the year. There's plenty of cold water coming out of the faucet.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that's it's fascinating. That's a habit I've gotten out of. And I'll tell you, I think another advantage of having conversations like this and being exposed to things is, I'd heard in the past, I didn't really explore the breathing techniques, but it's really resonated with me, because one of the things you said, we're very big, Stu and I, on our morning routine, and, get into the Bible, try to spend some time meditating. But I'll tell you what, dude, meditating for me is a no-go, man. And you almost feel like a failure to start your day, because my mind doesn't work that way. I try so hard to be silent and still and quiet. And I'll just tell you, man, I'm 42 and I've been trying it for years, and I've not had a sense of getting better. But the breathing and then the cold showers have really, they're just in your control. They're, it's a very physical thing. And even Stu and I were talking the other day, we were doing some of our best conversations and thinking on a hike in the mountains. We were up in the mountains, and so everybody's different, right? And your meditation is also different, but the breathing and being exposed to a conversation like this and with different techniques, I think will also help you gain wins, but also clarity and all the benefits, not only physical, but mental and spiritual benefits of doing this type of routine. And I think it's the exposure to it, right? It's fascinating to me that, and I think you also hit on with your French buddy, the accountability of it is also huge. And I think that could take you to that next level, which probably where some of that mindset stuff comes in.
Yeah. There's absolutely no doubt that, I have a crew. I like a little serenity sometimes when I'm dipping on my own, doing my own practice, but on Sundays we have a standing, reservation, if you want to call it, at 9:00 every Sunday. And there's no doubt that sometimes there's that ego kicks in a little bit, and you're like, I don't want to do it, but I've got to go down. And of course, you're the Wim Hof guy, you've got to stay in, and that's a lesson too. Like, you talk about failure sometimes, there's been times where I've pushed myself in the cold water, for usually an egoic type reason. And you can feel it, like physiologically, it's like, you know what, dude, you pushed it a little bit, right? And it's, so again, one of the amazing benefits for me of breathwork has just been, having some awareness around, physiology. And I see that more and more when I'm coaching either first responders or performance athletes, is that's not something like over breathing, which is not a common term. And over breathing and CO2 tolerance are things that some performance athletes, like I was coaching an NFL player a couple of weeks ago, and never heard of over breathing. And again, this isn't bad, but it's just not a topic. And of course, I'm in that persuasion, right? So, and then, we talked a little about CO2 tolerance, and he just started to hear about CO2 tolerance and how it can improve performance and those sorts of things. Patrick McEwen, who's the Botteco guy, he does amazing work. If you like the Irish accent, listen to him on YouTube. He does some great work around, CO2 tolerance and the science behind it. But it's fascinating what CO2 tolerance does. And again, I'll say from a performance standpoint, but also from a physical standpoint. A breath work, this is a breath work I've been playing with a little bit. And while we're talking about CO2 tolerance, then we can come back to the Wim Hof method if you want. Is I call playing the edge, right? And this is difficult to do on your own because it's easy to stop. But if you can imagine, right, we're breathing. Now, if you can slow your breath down, and usually I'll do it lying down so I can be a little bit more, if you want to say, meditative, and then you let your breath get gradually and more gradually shallower, typically through the belly and typically through the nose, to the point where how little can I breathe and sustain that breath, like just taking a little, to where you start feeling a term called air hunger, right? Which is something we don't often feel. But if I can slow my breathing down to where I'm just, which I can't do while I'm talking, but if you can imagine lying there and just slowing your breathing down to where you're starting to feel that pang of air hunger, like, but you don't gasp. And if you feel that need to gasp, then just slowly increase. And so I've really started to play what I call, I ride the edge, and I tried to ride the edge for somewhere between 2 to 5 minutes. How slow can I make my breath? How low and shallow can I make my breath without having to gasp? And that will increase my CO2 tolerance. And there's a lot of science around, our system, the urge to breathe is based on our CO2 levels, not our oxygen levels, right? We are full, our body is full of redundant systems to make sure we don't run out of oxygen. Most of us will never be able to not breathe to death consciously. We'll need some water or someone to whack us on the head or something like that. And so what's really interesting, you bring in some psychology around the fear of suffocation, right? And so, there's strong correlation now between our ability to elevate our CO2 tolerance and physical performance, but also our ability to deal with stress and stress chemicals, because there's that primal fear of suffocation that kicks in and does a lot of different things, right? As these redundant systems sort of get activated, it goes DEFCON 1, DEFCON 2, and it's sort of elevating, saying, dude, you're going to suffocate. So it keeps pressing the bigger buttons harder. But if we're able to deal with greater levels of CO2 in our body, it helps performance and then recovery after a lot of physical exertion. But it really helps us mediate the amount of stress chemicals that get flushed into our body in a really activated sympathetic nervous system. And I think what a lot of people also fail to understand from a breathwork perspective is we need CO2 as much as we need oxygen. You've all heard of those people who hyperventilate, right? And that is uncontrolled breathing, deep breathing, right? And what's amazing is the person has 100% dissolved O2 in their blood. They will almost suffocate or pass out because they don't have enough CO2 to have that beautiful conversion, or the diffusion that happens in our alveoli, the Bohr effect, the gas pressure. So we don't have enough CO2 in our body to actually absorb the oxygen. So I've got as much oxygen I can get in there, but I'm going to suffocate because I don't have enough CO2. So being able to, this is sort of my most recent level of fascination of studies around the CO2 tolerance and how it can really help not only athletes, but people deal with stress. And so, that breath work, and it's not really a protocol as much as it's just, I guess it is, but I call it playing the edge, right? And I'll slow my breathing down and make it as shallow and slow as I can. It's almost like, if you can imagine, you're taking little sips of air through your nose, in and out, and then I feel that air hunger. How long can I sustain that feeling of air hunger before I have to go and gasp? And that's one way to do CO2 tolerance training. And while we're talking about one other way, we'll talk about box breathing in a minute. So we talk about a box. So inhale, hold with a full lung or a full apnea. Exhale is the other side, and then hold either with a neutral lung. So that would be a box. So if you play with the bottom triangle, so it would be an inhale, say you're in for 5, out for 5, and then hold with a neutral lung for 5. That's I call that the bottom triangle, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then you can just extend that neutral lung hold. So if you want to go, maybe you can go in for 6, out for 6, hold for 6, or you can go in for 6 or in for 5, out for 5, and then hold for 10. And then you're holding without air in your lungs, which again is elevating, it's CO2 training. And by doing that alone, especially in performance athlete, a collegiate soccer player who I work with, that's all we did. We just basically got on the phone and I led him through some CO2 tolerance training. We talked a little about the science before. He's a fit guy, right? This guy's got like 10% body fat, like runs all day. He's 19, he's 20 years old, just like, and he was able to elevate his game. He wasn't as tired at the end of a game of running around for 90 minutes,
Wow.
So CO2 tolerance is really good. And there's some amazing benefits to stress levels and the way stress chemicals are dumped into our body in that activated state through CO2 tolerance training. So
That's awesome. Hey, can you explain you mentioned the 4-7-8 method, and we talked about kind of getting rid of monkey brain and anxiety and stress. Like, can you explain that one real fast?
Yeah. So 4-7-8, we can call it breath of bliss. And I realized I may have coached this wrong when I was teaching you guys the other day, but 4-7-8 is inhale for 4, hold for 7, and then exhale for 8. And essentially what we're doing there is we're switching from an inhalation focus to an exhalation focus, right? So if we inhale for 4, and then we're going to hold for 7, and then we exhale for 8. So it'd be in through the nose, ideally, in through the nose and into your belly for 4, hold without the full, like you want to have a full lung. So fill it up. And then you're going to slowly let it go. So it's not drop it all out and then hold your breath. You want to control that exhale for 8 seconds. So 4-7-8. And then if you do that 5 times, right? So that's almost a minute of breathing. And that is going to, I do this sometimes before bed, or if you find yourself, you're a little jacked up. So, I was coming on with Dave and Stu, I'm all excited. Maybe I do 4-7-8 to actually dial it down a little bit, right? And be like,
you did the sniff poo to get fired up, and then you got too fired up.
Yeah. Then I got too fired up. So I had to do the 4-7-8 to relax. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then, while we're talking other simple techniques, box breathing is a great way, and if we think sort of top triangle and bottom triangle there, and if you can sort of imagine, we've got activated sympathetic, activated parasympathetic. So we're going rest and digest and fight or flight. Military teach this a lot. A lot of Marines learn this breathing when I'm in a situation where I need to be alert, but I'm not pressing on the gas too much. So I'm not alert and on guard all the time. So it's just in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. So in through the nose. And again, if it's available to you, other than when it's stated, I would say all your inhalations and exhalations should be through your nose. It's just much better for you. It's a great air conditioner, HEPA filter, all that sort of stuff up in our sinuses. So, box breathing, and you can stretch that too, right? So it doesn't have to be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 4 is great. Then hold 2, 3, 4. And box breathing is another great one. And that will just, if you can imagine, I'm going to do a slow burn of my fuel, then do box breathing, right? And it'll keep me alert and maintain. That's sort of like a maintain my state, right?
So what is, practically speaking on a day-to-day basis, what's your routine like for doing some of this stuff? I mean, are you waking up in the morning as a part of your morning routine, doing, the sniff poo or the box breathing, or like?
So I roll out of bed and I typically do, a super ventilated breath work. So I do Wim Hof or a very similar, and it's for 15 minutes. So essentially that's 3 minutes of breathing, 2 minutes of breath hold, 3 minutes of breathing, 2 minutes of breath hold. So that's 15 minutes. And then, I've been doing it a long time. So my awareness is a lot more. I try to make sure, how often am I breathing through my nose, right? And if I catch myself, I'm sitting here, I've been talking a lot, I'll probably get off this. And when I'm driving to my workout, I'll slow my respiration to 5 or 6 breaths a minute. So that's 10-second cycle, all through the nose. And again, if I haven't reiterated, our nose was designed for breathing. This is talking and eating. And it's been a tough lesson for me as a mouth breather for a long time. But yeah, so, and then I'll play the edge usually, where I can find 4 to 5 minutes. Sometimes it's right before bed. I play the edge, and then I will do 4-7-8 or sniff stiff poo when as needed. There's, if I haven't slept well and I've got to, be present. I'm sure you guys know what that's like. You get on with someone and they're like, this guy's not at all dialed in, or you're watching someone on the other side of the screen and they're like, yeah, this guy is, whatever. So, I always want to make sure you're giving someone their attention. And the easiest way to do that is for me to, do 30 seconds of breathing, right? I'll also say, breathing's the quickest way to change your state, absolutely.
Yeah, that's one thing that I'm kind of curious. What if you have a physiological, so like you probably can't tell right now, but from football, effectively all the cartilage in my nose is shifted to one side. And so the inside, one nostril is essentially closed, the other one's is wide open. And so there's a physiological, because I've been listening to this and listening to your stuff and reading up on it, the nose breathing is a huge focus and just the emphasis on how good it is for you. And as I've been doing it, I'm like, man, sometimes just physiologically, it just doesn't work out like it should, especially when, the nostrils, they even went to the level of detail of breathing through your left versus your right nostril for different effects. And I'm like, that might be problematic. So I'm just curious how that impacts.
I mean, I had an issue. I had a deviated septum and because I was a swimmer for a long time, I didn't use my nose to breathe a lot. And so there is a little bit of, if you don't use it, you lose it. Like I had a lot of buildup of, just tissue in my nose because I didn't clear the airway. Obviously you have physical obstruction from injury and just, getting whacked in the nose, I'd imagine. You certainly can increase the volume through the more by doing alternate nostril breathing. Either one side, or you can do in, out, and just alternate nostril breathing can certainly help. You just have to be in a little bit more relaxed when you're using the stuff side, because, you may end up with some air hunger. Typically speaking, anyone who from a counter type, contraindication, if you have any sort of epileptic history, you shouldn't do super ventilated breath work. So don't do Wim Hof breath work or the faster sniff poo's okay, but if you do that for a long period of time, it can potentially trigger. They also say people who are pregnant should not do longer extended super ventilated breath work. If you have cardiac conditions, you certainly want to check with your doctor before you do it. But I've had heart transplant patients that I've coached through breathing and with a pulse oximeter and a few other things, you can just slowly see where their levels are at, right? The other thing that you could do, I had a deviated septum. I had a rebore about 4 years ago and made the world of difference to me, and especially with the breathing. It's not fun because that area does not heal very quickly. So it was sort of like a 6-month situation before I actually felt really comfortable blowing my nose again. But that's an option. The other thing, and I know I mentioned it on the other call, but taping your mouth shut at night can, if you have trouble sleeping, a little bit of surgical tape. I tape my mouth shut periodically. So I'll do it for a month, and then I'm probably good for 3 months where I'm mostly nasal breathing at night. So that could be something that you could certainly try even during the day, right? If you find, hey, listen, if you call your awareness to it, am I mouth breathing a lot? Then maybe when I'm sitting down, I don't need to talk. just take my mouth shut. And how much of a struggle is that for me to actually breathe through my nose? And if it is, then maybe you want to see what other things, you can do from.
I think the bigger struggle is going to be not talking.
Yeah, right.
That'll be the biggest struggle.
I was thinking if I'll just punch you in the nose on the side and get back in line, and maybe that'd work.
Yeah, and I considered that, but I'd probably need like a man punch. You know what I mean? like a man punch to really get it shifted over. But I appreciate your support and
here for you
and your willingness to do that. Thank you.
Yeah,
that's real service there.
That's what business partners and best friends are for, right?
Yeah, Stu, that's awesome.
And instead of Stu, I'll probably put a stitch through your lips instead of tape. Something a little more permanent, just kind of like a stitch. I think might be might be appropriate. No, that's that is absolutely fascinating, and I think I can see totally geeking out. And one of the things I was listening to, I think it was the Breathe author. Is it Breathe or Breath? Breath.
James Nestor.
James Nestor.
Yeah.
And one of the things he said, and I was very conscious of it. He said, "Man, I became obsessive about my breath," and I'm like, I got to be careful of that because you could, with the, but I think that there's a level too of awareness that just will really help you to, get through some of these, and it's fascinating to me to just, again, it's different ways to better yourself, right? It's like working out.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it's an evolution. I mean, I call myself now, I've been a conscious breather for 5 years. Right. And I'm still learning and trying, like this edge breath I talk about now, like I've only been doing that for probably 6 months. And I really look to do things that'll move the needle for me in one way. I'm doing something just because, for the sake of doing it, like that's redundant to me is like, move on. Right. Like, and I will tell you that's one of the beauties of the Wim Hof breath. I've been doing that regularly now for 4.5, 5 years, and I still get the same effect. So it's a bit like, hey, listen, if I'm curling, 40 pounds, right? I'm no He-Man in the gym, so 40 is pretty good for me. Like I don't need to go to 60, to keep working out, right? Like when you think about resistance too, like one of the other things that a lot of people fail to realize, our diaphragm is a muscle, right? And mouth breathing, which has more resistance, this hole or this hole, right? And so if we want to train something, we use resistance, right? So that's again why nasal breathing is much better for our physiological cardiovascular health, because it's training our diaphragm, right? From a muscle standpoint. So
that's I'm going to keep my nose the way it is because I believe in resistance and exercise. Yeah. So I'm going to keep my nose just as is to increase the weight.
Yeah, for sure.
In the weight room.
For sure. So, I mean, if you want to, I can do a quick sort of Wim Hof breathwork demo, right? If that can help.
I think it'd be awesome.
We do it.
Yeah. So the Wim Hof breathwork, as I said before, the protocol from a breathwork perspective is 30 to 40 breaths, and full breath in. Ideally, if it's available to you, in through the nose, out through the nose if you want to, but Wim will often say you got plenty of holes, just get as much air in and as much air out as you can, right? So we're going to go fully in. So we're going to, and one other part about that is a wave, right? So if we're going to wave it in, again, Buddha belly up into the chest, and then we're going to just let it go. So if you imagine your diaphragm, I'll stand up a little bit. So our diaphragm sort of up here, it's going to go expand, and then we're just going to have it relax, right? Not all the way out where you're squeezing your belly. So if we go for that breath, it's going to go up into my chest. Let it out. So, enabling that breath wave of fully in. In. And in. Out. And in. Out. Expand. Relax. Relax. And in. Relax. We'll do 5 more. Fully in. Relax. And in. Relax. Fully in. Let it go. Last one. Fully in. Let it go. Find that neutral lung. And just hold. Stop. And just relax. Relax down through your shoulders. Relax that jaw. Maybe use your awareness to find your heartbeat. Just be still. Breath hold, retention on a neutral lung. If you feel that need to breathe, see if you're able to relax into that just a little bit more. When you need, you take a recovery breath, which is a full breath in and hold. And then let that out. You might feel some happy joys in your head a little bit. I might be a little bit flushed. And
Yeah, I got a little lightheaded on that one. That was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, sitting up is not the ideal place to do it. It'll certainly elevate that. There's plenty of physiological stuff going on. A lot of people don't realize there's a hydraulic action to that superventilative breath work. And again, to step into some of the more esoteric sort of disciplines, whether it's chi or prana, we have cerebral spinal fluid, or, that comes up our spine and into our head. And so that breath work acts a little bit like a hydraulic action. And so we're slowly jacking up that's activating that cerebral spinal fluid. And then, we can do some other things at different times with a squeeze, and we can tap into, pineal gland and different things up in the top of our head. But that gets into some of the more non-physical woo-woo stuff that maybe we can leave for another time. So
yeah, that's freaking awesome.
That was awesome. I love it. Yeah, no, I really appreciate you coming on. That I think again, it's just the constant evolution to try to get better, and the little ways, and even recognizing, digging into some of the history of our food and our breathing and how we've gotten to where we are. And actually, when I was listening to James speak, talking about how we're actually moving backwards in some senses with our nutrition, we're moving backwards with our health, we're moving backwards with some of these things, even though the access to information is so much greater than it's ever been in the history of the world.
I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. The amount of, like, my to-do list of podcasts and information, there's a site called PubMed, which I know Huberman talks about a lot. And I mean, the countless studies that I would never thought I'd get blind reading, medical studies. But there's so much information out there. To me, it almost seems criminal that we are not making improvements, and we are sliding. And not only, I'm not necessarily talking individually, but generally speaking, and the more aware you become of how we're sedentary and poisoning ourselves and not connected to the parts that we need to be connected to, it almost, it feels criminal, right?
Yeah.
And the access we have to that information, and that's part of the reason why I love doing what I'm doing. There are very few people who've not come to a breathwork class where they've at least gone, man, that was cool. And even if it ends up being that one time I went to that breathwork class and it was kind of cool, fantastic. But obviously my goal is to, help and improve people's lives in a real way. So.
And I think that's a huge piece I want to thank you for, is the fact that you took it as something that you were trying to do to better yourself, which I think is amazing and a very growth minded thing. But then you took it and who you are is turning it into something to help other people. I love that. And I think your clients and the folks that you, even this, right, this exposure is so beneficial. And I'm just extremely grateful that you took the time to spend with a couple knuckleheads and help us to, at least explore it a little further. And we'll talk once we log off here on some opportunities that I think we would love to explore and getting in front of the group and stuff.
The other part I'll mention to that too, I certainly think, as men in the world we live in today, I think the conditioning that we have in the world we live in today is again, very external. And so, we're all, our identity, I guess, the best way to talk about it, the identity and what we're connected to with who we are needs to be, re-engineered. And I know for me, breath work has been a huge part of re-engineering, the identity I have for myself, and I think the world needs, more guys like you, far from a couple of knuckleheads, but trying to make a difference, right? And bring information that to people who, it's palatable in certain ways, right? And so, whether it's, a guy in an orange robe standing in a waterfall doing that, or it's a couple of guys on a podcast talking about different things, I think, getting the information to the way people can assimilate with it is so important.
James, like David said, man, we really appreciate you coming on. It's been a fun conversation, and I'm going to go back and listen to it and start practicing some of this stuff. It's been good. How do people get a hold of you? I know you said that there's a website on the way. You're kind of doing some push, get some stuff.
So, James Stewart on Facebook. I'm Renman on Instagram. I'm not prolific there. So that's RENN.MANN on Instagram. I'll certainly happily give you my email and phone number if there's anyone I can help out. If there is one ask, if I'm able,
please,
if anybody has any connection with the VA hospitals, or anything like that, my goal about 18 months ago, and that's how I ended up on the military thing, was my goal 18 months ago was to get into a VA and actually donate my time to help veterans breathe. Well, not really to help them breathe, but teach them breath work to help them with other stuff. So if anyone has a connection with the VA, I live very close to a VA hospital here, and I've talked to all the people I need to, and they basically say, unless I can get someone further up the chain of command to tick off on it, I really can't do it. So that'd be my only ask. If anyone has a connection with the VA and thinks that this would be valuable, I'd be happy to have a conversation, and I'm happy to do all the legwork. I'm not asking for someone to open the door, but if you got a contact, I'd be happy to chase it down and knock on all the doors I need to knock on, so I can,
and there may be there's some other folks that we work with that we support that could probably be amazing opportunity as well. So we'll talk once we log off. Cool. And things like Warrior's Heart and those types of things pop in my head. So
cool.
Awesome.
It was fun, gentlemen. Thank you.
Stuff, man. Yeah.
Thank you,
guys
all.
And gals. Hey, reach out to James if this is something you want to learn more about. We'll put some show notes to how to get in touch with him. Hey, dig into this. This is super important. It's just another way to make yourself better. If you like this, share it. Give us 5-star reviews. Share it with someone. Post it on your social medias and tag us. And but most importantly, let's go fill your storehouse.
Yeah, make it a great day, friends. Thank you so much, James. You're awesome. Thanks, you,
James.
Appreciate you.
Thanks for listening to Filling the Storehouse. If you enjoyed our show, please subscribe and share it with someone you love. And if you really felt inspired, leave a 5-star review so we could continue to grow and help other Christian entrepreneurs build their storehouse. If you're interested in creating financial freedom through real estate investing, be sure to check out our website at storehouse310turnkey.com. We'd love to serve you through our platform of Building the Kingdom. Just click on the contact link and we'll reply to you as soon as we can. Again, thanks so much for listening. Now go fill your storehouse and make it a great day.